In this wonderful little book that I have called Philosophy Can Save Your Life. It's a book written by Marietta McCarty. She's credited on one of the slides, so you can see her name if you're interested in looking at her book. She's a philosophy teacher somewhere in the States at a college. And she wrote a great book, and anyway, so I was reading it, and at one point she goes into this whole little section where she's describing Epictetus's toolbox. Now you remember that Epictetus was the slave, correct? Remember that? What was wrong with his physical body? What infirmity did he have? I can't remember. His master broke his leg when he was a slave because he was freed eventually by the master and lived the rest of his life as a free man. But so he always walked with a crutch, and he was lame as a result of that. And so you can imagine that he had a lot to deal with in terms of just dealing day to day with physical pain, right? And so in one of his lines he talks about how infirmity is really only a condition of the body. It's not a condition of the mind. So you don't have to be lame and limp in the mind. Like that, what's going on with your body and limiting you in the body doesn't have to be what goes on and limits you in the mind, right? So I just wanted to show you these images because I thought that the idea of looking at how the Stoics lived their life and comparing that to tools, I thought it was a really good idea. So we remember that ataraxia is a Greek word meaning, Angela? Really important word. Probably going to come up somewhere. Anybody?
Isn't it the
state of being?
Freedom, tranquility.
Freedom from emotional disturbance, the state of tranquility, otherwise known as, it's right here on the slide, otherwise known as serenity as well. So in English we might call that serenity, being calm and peaceful, but it's not something that is momentary, like right now I'm calm and peaceful because everything's fine, I had a good breakfast, there are no major problems in my life, and everything is good. That's not really what they're talking about. They're talking about a baseline state that is a part of your sort of emotional makeup. And I don't want to say character, but your sort of like emotional makeup, a part of how you see the world. And if you have that sort of baseline state as how you see the world, then whatever the world throws at you, you're going to, yes, you're going to have good days, bad days, you'll react, you'll be happy, sad, or whatever, but you're going to be able to minimize all the ups and downs of the world and your own emotional reaction to it, because you will be able to reason through your emotions with your reason and logic. And that's why you have this picture here of the calm lake. That was the same image that I showed you the last time, right? So what is serenity? What does it feel like to be serene? Give me a couple of synonyms or some pictures that come up in your mind about when you're feeling serene and calm. What does that feel like? Natasha.
It feels peaceful.
Okay, peaceful. Another adjective? When you're feeling like that. What does your body feel like when you're feeling like that?
Tranquility.
Okay, but what, Sunday morning, you're hanging around in bed, no worries, life is good, you're just calm. What does your body feel like? Contrast that to what your body feels like when you're really, really stressed. Okay? So what does your body feel like when you're in that state of ataraxia?
Relaxed.
Okay, and so peaceful, relaxed. What else does it feel like? Free. There's a certain sense of freedom. There's a lightness It doesn't feel cramped and heavy and hard. There's a lightness. So all of these things can be things that we feel also in our mind and in our emotional state. So the possession of a steady spirit, mind, and emotions that provide a consistent way of being in the world no matter what. So that's the way that the Greeks and the Roman Stoics saw ataraxia. It's not something that you aim for this 24-hour period. It's something that you aim for as a way of looking at the world and yourself in the world that will help you live a better life. Because remember, the larger question is, what is the good life and the pursuit of the good life? How do you get there? So ataraxia is not something that, I said it's not flashy because it's not, it's not something you go around boasting about, right? It's just, it's who you are. It's how you're wired up emotionally. And so it's not something that's immediately obvious either when you meet people. You don't immediately know that person has that thing, except that you're probably going to feel it in people that are like that. And you're probably going to feel attracted to people who have that. Because they have this way about them of just sort of calming you down. I hope you have somebody like that in your life. I have a good friend who's probably the only person who can really take me from way up there down to like, okay, everything's fine. Right? So those are the kind of things that people will feel about you. It doesn't, if you have it doesn't mean that you'll never have another bad day, and it doesn't mean that you'll never suffer. That's not what it means. But it's a pretty good vaccination against unnecessary suffering. And why would your suffering be unnecessary, Sarah?
I don't know, you could like control it.
Because you don't have to feel that way. Because if you look at it another way, you'll feel something different. And so if you don't like how you feel, what do you change? I just keep on saying this over and over again because I want it to be like a little motto here. If you don't like how you feel, change how you think. Get that down in your notes, guys. If you don't like how you feel, if you're feeling bad today, look at your thoughts. What are you thinking? Observe them. Examine them. Because somewhere in there's a thought that's causing you grief. Reevaluate it. That's the Stoic position. So, serenity, ataraxia, whatever you want to call it, is really good for your health. Because we know stress kills. And we also know that if you have been stressed, and then you can come back to serenity, it can restore health. So it's restorative as well. So what are the prerequisites for getting to ataraxia? This is according to this Marietta McCarthy, and here's the title of her book if you wanted to go check it out. So she says, well, it's not easy to get to, right, this famous Stoic place of ataraxia. But she says one of the first things that we need is we need simplicity. Things don't have to be so complicated. Wherever you can bring simplicity to your life, go for it. Whatever you can do to simplify how you live and how you interact in the world, do that. Value simplicity above other things. And the simplicity will go a long way to helping you feel more serene in life. Then she talks about self-respect and personal integrity. What's integrity? Adam?
Integrity? It's like more of an inner feeling, like integrity to...
It's an inner feeling, yeah. Give me an example of somebody who has no integrity.
There's no integrity.
Yeah. Give me an example of a situation where somebody does something and it appears to you to be that this person is not genuine, that they're not acting with integrity.
For example, if someone cheated on a debt.
Okay, so cheating. So if you cheat, then you are not a person with integrity. Why? What if you believe cheating is good?
Well, because you're lying, no? You're fooling people.
You're lying to other people, you're lying to your teacher, okay. But what if you believe cheating is good and you cheat? Are you still acting with no integrity?
I guess not.
Tyler, what do you think?
It depends because like any situation depends what you're in. You kind of,
No, it doesn't.
I don't think.
No. Sorry, no. I'm going to pull you guys away from that. It always depends on what... No. There are some things that... No. Here's what integrity means, people. If to you, lying and cheating is not a good thing, it's not a value by which you want to live your life, and you find yourself lying and cheating, then you know what? In that instance, you're not acting with integrity. Okay? If you say that your education is important, and what you're doing is the opposite of education being important, then you're not acting with integrity. So, having integrity means walking the talk. Right? Having integrity means living according to what you say your values are. And if you are let's say in WIC, and you sign technology pledges, and you agree to live according to the rules of whatever group you're in, whether it be a democratic society, whether it be a sporting team, whether it be a school, wherever it is, if you agree to live by those rules on the one hand, and then the other hand, you break them at every chance or whenever it's convenient for you, then you don't have integrity. So integrity is living, what was that?
Talking shit.
Okay, living according to what it is you say your most cherished values are. Does that make sense, guys? So not having two faces, having one face.
Is it your cherished values or is it like other people?
Your cherished
Like,
values.
is it like morals of other people?
They're your values. All right? But as the example that you gave, let's say you're in a test, and for you cheating is not the end of the world.
But the moral is good.
Right? And so if you say, well, look, everybody cheats, it's not so bad. Let's say, I don't know, you're in a sporting competition, and one of the athletes is using steroids, and the other athletes are not. But for the athletes using steroids, they're saying, well, it's okay. But you know what? They still don't have integrity, because if they really did, and if using steroids or cheating an exam really is okay for you, then you better stand up and be honest and obvious about that. Because if you're going to lie about it and hide it, then you know what? That's not integrity. Does everybody have a sense of what that is? You've got to be real. Okay? Does that? Can you all think of examples of where you acted with integrity in your life? And that might have maybe got you into a difficult situation, maybe a little bit of hot water, maybe you had to tell the truth, or maybe you didn't really want to tell the truth. But those are moments of when we act with integrity. So, if you act with integrity, why will that bring you one step closer to ataraxia? Melissa?
Well, I mean, I'm only speaking from personal experience, but usually when you lie, you kind of get this sense of guilt. And you kind of feel bad about lying or bad about not necessarily being honest. So by telling the truth and sort of giving yourself that honesty, you're not only being honest to the other person, but you're being honest to yourself. And that creates kind of like a more peaceful state of mind.
Excellent example. And it's always important to take examples from our lived experience, because that's our knowledge. That's what you know to be true in your guts, right? So I hate myself when I lie. So let me not lie, and then I will be more calm. I will feel better about who I am. And then you're taking one step closer to ataraxia. Okay? If you are, so freedom from self-absorption is her third point here. You understand what it means to be self-absorbed when you're full of yourself? Right? And being vain, and everything is about you, and the whole world is about you, and it's, why would that take you away from being calm and serene? Why would being full of yourself and egotistical and selfish and vain and everything else, why would that make you less serene than somebody else? Maybe. So let's say if you're not that way, if you are free from being self-absorbed, then you're probably a humble person. So you see what's coming up here: simplicity, self-respect, being humble. Why would a humble person feel more serene than a person who is, it's all about me.
Well, because I guess you don't have that many things to like think about because you were like honest and I don't know, I think being humble kind of like reduces your problems and stuff because that you're not like thinking about
Comparing yourself with somebody else.
Yeah, it's
right.
Like you're living a simple life, so like it reduces your problems and like you're kind of
reduces it. Excellent. So I'm not the smartest, I'm not the prettiest, I'm not the strongest, the fastest, the richest, everything else, but I am what I am, and I like that. And I don't have to prove it to anybody. So when you're humble in that way and you don't have anything to prove, guess what? It keeps you peaceful, right? It's one step closer to that ataraxia. Broaden your perspectives. I keep on coming back to this in your writing too, eh? This is the last one. This is the reframing. Broaden your perspectives. How can looking at a big picture every once in a while and broadening your perspectives, how can that bring you closer to ataraxia? What happens when you look at things beyond your own way of looking at them?
Maybe you're more understanding.
Okay, you can develop more empathy. Anything else? Mikhail? It'll help you also understand that it's not all about you and the way you see it, right? So and that will also keep you humble because truth is a big thing and you don't always have a corner on it, right? You don't always have all of it. Most of the time we don't. Belonging to something greater than yourself, I think, is also really important for helping us be free from self-absorption. But there's something else that this brings to somebody. Can you give me an example, John, of something that you might belong to that is bigger than you?
Well, it could be like if you're religious, a religious group.
Okay, belong to a religious group or a faith group. Anything else? What are the different labels that we put on ourselves when we call it, I'm a this, I'm a that, blah, blah. Just think like that. You might not be connected yet to any sort of a political view, but sometimes in our youth we find a political perspective and we can call ourselves, I'm a liberal, I'm an NDP, I'm a conservative, or I'm an anarchist, or I'm a communist, or I'm a whatever, right? You might also have a particular philosophy that you see that you belong to that makes more sense to you, right? You might also belong to an important organization that does good in the community. That's belonging to something bigger than... There's so many things that we belong to that are bigger than ourselves. You guys belong to this school community, and even after you graduate, you will always be alum of West Island College. And in that sense, there's always a continued sense of belonging. So there's a lot of things that we belong. You belong to your family. You belong to your family in a way that's so deep that genetic belonging is mind-blowing, how deep that is. And maybe you don't see it when you're younger, or maybe we don't appreciate it the same way until we grow up and families move away, and then we come back and we see one another, and we see reflections of our parents in our siblings. We see reflections of ourselves in our parents if you don't have any siblings, if you're an only child. And those things go deep. And to communicate really clearly. If you can communicate clearly, you're probably really good at being humble, not being self-absorbed, and having personal integrity. So, this is Epictetus. When you see pictures of him or drawings of him, you always see his cane because his master broke his leg, and there's a little story that they tell about the day that it happened. I mean, who knows? This was not written down except for probably Epictetus told his student who wrote his memoirs. Just let me get to the story. Take your break, I'll tell you the story after.
Because he was a slave and he wasn't free.
Yeah, so the slave who taught about freedom, there's the wonderful irony, right? The one who lived his life in chains is the one who teaches people who are free what it means to be free. And so his whole thing is, it's not because your body is in chains or infirm or lame that your mind has to be. So a little bit of irony there. So I think what's really important, well, there's a couple of things that are important here. What's interesting, Hadrian was a powerful emperor. So, when an emperor visits an ex-slave for wisdom, you know that this person has got something and saying something that's important. And it's only because of his student who wrote down some of his sayings in a book that you can read now on the internet. How marvelous is this world? It's called the Enchiridion, and there's a bunch of his sayings. It's only because his student wrote this that these because it was written in Latin, and that as a result of the Muslim scholars because we lost a lot of learning and books and knowledge in the Middle Ages. But some of that was kept for us, if you know your history, by the church, by the monks, and also by the Muslim scholars who translated that for us. And so an important person who had a huge impact on James Stockdale, and I spoke to you a little bit about this man. Can anybody remember what I said about James Stockdale? I can't remember. Yeah.
I believe he was a war prisoner in Vietnam.
Yeah.
And he spent 7 years, what it says in this.
Yes, yeah.
He was isolated.
He spent 2 years in isolation. They also they tortured him. As a result, he had a lame leg as well, like Epictetus. But he had a really solid undergraduate training in Western civilization and philosophy and the classics. And he read Epictetus and other philosophers, not just the Stoics. And so Stockdale quoted Epictetus as saying, so this is what he writes an essay. Stockdale writes an essay about his time as a prisoner of war in Vietnam and how he got through that. And he said, Epictetus is saying, the emotions of grief, pity, and even affection, or emotion, are well-known disturbers of the soul. Grief is the most offensive. Epictetus considered the suffering of grief an act of evil. It is a willful act going against the will of God to have all men share happiness. I'm not going to get into that last line. I think that's going to confuse you a little bit. So here's the toolbox for the Stoics. A level. Why do we need a level? Daniel. It tells you when things are straight.
The literal meaning. I thought you were
Yes.
going to dig off philosophical.
No, why do we need a level?
Well, I have to basically tell us when things are straight and not crooked. I thought we were actually going to be philosophical.
No, we are being philosophical now.
Okay,
we're taking, this is a metaphor, okay? And so she's comparing in her wonderful little book, Ms. McCarty, she's comparing all these tools in a toolbox in the Stoics Toolbox. And so what does a level do? Well, it tells us when things are straight and when things are crooked. How does that apply to us in terms of our reasoning and evaluation judgment? Somebody take a stab? Make a comparison? When might your thinking be crooked? Ethan?
When you're being influenced by emotions.
Okay, when you're being influenced by emotions, maybe when you are making a wrong judgment about a situation.
Like a rash decision.
A rash decision. Maybe you're making a judgment about a situation you don't have all the information. All right? Maybe you're not using your reason as well as you could. And so if you don't use your reason and logic and have all the information before you evaluate what this thing means to you, you may be making a wrong conclusion. And remember, how you think creates how you feel. So it's the thinking part is what's really, really important here. right? So come to the right conclusions about events and things. And so the level is, for him, what are the things that you can control? Because remember, the Stoics were big about that. If something is out of your control, then, you should not be trying to control that. You should not be worrying about that, because if it is out of your control and it's causing you grief, you have nobody to blame but yourself. Why? Natasha. If it's out of your control and it's causing you grief, you have nobody to blame but yourself, according to the Stoics. Why?
Because really, if we can't blame someone else for not being able to control our emotions, technically. Because if we're upset about something, we can't say, oh, it's their fault that I'm upset because you're not being able to control how you're feeling.
Okay, so in your example, that's a good example. So in your example, you're talking about somebody does something. And that something that they do hurts you. And so Epictetus and the Stoics would say, look, you can't control how somebody acts. You can't control how somebody else feels. And so if you are allowing somebody else's opinions, behavior, judgment to affect you, then you only have yourself to blame. If you can't control that thing, then you have to let it go. And you only focus on what you can control. That's what the level is for. All right? For right thinking. What can you control? Daniel, what can you control?
What we have a level of.
Say it loudly so I can pick it up on the mic.
What we have a level of.
What? Say that again?
What we I don't really know how to describe it really, but we control Okay, wait, I have to rephrase this. Sound better in my mind.
Okay, you take 2 seconds to rephrase. I'm going to go over here to Adam.
Okay.
What can we control?
The way we think, our beliefs.
You can only control your thoughts, right? You can only control your mind, your thinking, your reason, your logic, your response to a situation. You can't control nature. You can't control what other people think and feel. There's, according to the Stoics, most of what's going on in your life you can't control.
But
Yeah.
isn't that a selfish point of view? Because if someone passes away and you feel grief, they're saying just get over it. It's your problem.
Not only is he saying just get over it, but Epictetus, when people would come to him and they were, beyond grief because they lost their child, they lost their spouse, he would say to them, why are you sad? Why are you grieving? You have only returned them. They've returned back to, nature, because the Stoics believed that nature was filled with reason. Look at the laws of nature. Nothing stays the same. Things come into being and they leave being. Things appear and they disappear. Things are created, and then the second law of thermodynamics, entropy, they disintegrate. Everything changes. Accept it. So for the Stoics, what this level is, you need to distinguish between what you can control and what you can't control. And what you can't control, you need to let it go. You need to focus only on those things that are in your control. Is that really clear, guys? Are you seeing the comparisons a little bit between that and Buddhism? The next tool in his Stoics Toolbox is a gauge for measuring. So you need to measure the true nature of a thing. And this is the philosopher's number one job, is asking a question, is what is this thing? Those are definitions. What does it mean to be a human being? Well, one of the things it means is to be mortal. You have a beginning and you have an end. And later on, when we get to existentialism, you'll see some philosophers call that the absurdity of our existence. Because no other mammal, no other sentient being in nature lives with an awareness of its own impending death. And that thought according to Jean-Paul Sartre and Camus, and I think you guys read Camus in Sec 5, L'étranger? Yeah? Okay. Well, so according to the French existentialists, that just makes life absurd. You know, I mean, that living with that pain, that you know that your end is there, but for the Stoics, it was not a deal, because nature was all about understanding. For the Stoics, you had to understand nature's laws. And mortality was a part of it. It's a part of nature. So see the world as it is. Accept it. And the minute you accept it and you let it go, then it no longer has power over you to create grief. And so he would say to the people who came to see him who were grieving, you've just returned your loved one to nature. And he also counseled a father once who was grieving deeply over the loss of his son, to go back to his other children and to whisper in their ear every day, one day you will die. One day you will die. Now to us it's like, oh my God, that's so brutal. Like, why would you want to do that? Well, it does two things. Number one, it reminds the parent that you don't own this person. This person is owned, if it owned at all, by nature. We only belong to nature. We don't belong to one another. And one day we will leave and we will go back to nature. And so understand the true nature of a thing. And that's what the gauge is for. Clippers. Clip away at your arrogance and your vanity. All of these things. You know, your self-absorption that drive that need in us to compare ourselves to other people and to get involved in unnecessary competitions that are not healthy. Accept your strengths and your weaknesses, and you'll be better for it. Tape over your mouth when you are whining about your suffering and your grief and your circumstances in life. Accept your lot in life. Be glad for what you have. Bear your pain, and do not envy others for what they have. The Stoics were really big on this. If you walked around with jealousy and envy for what other people have that you don't have, you're losing, and the Epicurean said the same thing too, the opportunity to enjoy what it is that you have, because you're looking over there and you're not looking here. You're also moving outside of the present moment, and you're projecting yourself into the future because you're looking at the greener grass on the other side. Does that make sense, guys? So the tape for not complaining, because if you're complaining, you're creating your own suffering. If you're complaining, you haven't understood. The next tool is the drill, and the drill is to drill home the truth that anger is Serenity's ataraxia nemesis. What's a nemesis?
Enemy.
An enemy, excellent. So anger is Serenity's nemesis, and it's the one thing in your life that you can control. That is in your control. And, you know, the world can't make you angry without your consent. So when I'm in the car and my mom's sitting next to me, we're driving somewhere, and somebody does something silly, cuts me off or whatever, and I get angry, my mother just looks at me and she just laughs, you know. Because so I just sort of get all bent out of shape. But I allow myself to get bent out of shape, because there are lots of days when I don't. There are lots of days when I'm completely serene at the wheel. And whatever goes on in front of me or behind me or next to me, as long as it's not an immediate danger, there's no emotional reaction on my part. So, you know, you can observe your emotional reactions in those kinds of situations, and you can gauge yourself, how serene am I being right now? Okay? Let me just come back to the drill. Because we started the class talking about how are the Buddhists and the Stoics similar. The Maturity Kal, when he was talking about pleasure, why pleasure is not good enough for happiness. Can anybody remember? He talked about a piece of cake. Remember that? Why pleasure is not enough? But if we're talking about what it means to be happy, what is happiness? What is the good life? Everybody says it's happiness. Why is pleasure not enough? Remember that the Epicureans, that's what they were all about, the simple pleasures in life. Michael, est-ce que tu te souviens? Why pleasure is not enough for a philosophy. It's not enough to live your life, according to the Buddhists, better get this in your notes, it's not enough to live your life with pleasure as your end goal. And that's Epicureanism. It's not enough. Why isn't it enough? And Jackie, you had your hand up.
I have it written down. It says the first serving is good, but the second one is not because we get tired of it.
Okay, that's for the cake,
Yeah.
right? And so now take that and bring that over to pleasure. So if pleasure is the foundation on which I build my entire moral philosophy and my entire way of living in this life, why isn't it enough? If we, then my pleasure is going to be contingent upon, what's this word contingent? Dependent upon getting the cake. And getting certain amounts of the cake and having enough willpower to only have one piece of cake. Because if I have two, I'm not going to feel good, and if I have three, I'll feel disgusted. So, according to the Buddhists, pleasure is not enough as a way of living your life, because you're always going to be controlled by whether you get the object of your pleasure. And if you don't get it, then you're going to be miserable. And that's pleasure that's external. And for the Buddhists, pleasure just doesn't cut it as a way of living. It's about happiness. And what happiness is serenity. And how do you get there? You examine your states of mind and you examine your emotions. And on that score, they're just like the Stoics. And he talked about a cloud. He talked about clouds in the sky. Can you remember what he said? He compared a dark storm cloud to anger. And then he talked about how if you were to go, those clouds look so real. And they look so scary and so menacing. But if you go up to the sky and you try to sit on that cloud, you're going to fall right through. Because what is that cloud actually made of? It's just made of mist. So what is your anger actually made of? Think like a Stoic. What's the one thing you can control if you're a Stoic?
Emotion.
Your thinking, right? Your reaction to your emotions, your reasoning, your logic, your mind, right? And so if that anger is not real, just like a cloud, it's just made up of things that's immaterial, that doesn't have real substance, what's anger made up of? According to the Stoics?
Bad emotion. Bad.
Improper judgments. You just need to reason that thing through again. Because you think that you should have control over that thing, and you don't. You just haven't understood it yet. And once you understand that you don't have control over that thing, you're not going to be angry anymore. And on that point, the Buddhists say, and Matsuri said in his talk, that if you take your minds, your reasoning, your logic, he talks about consciousness, and you examine the anger, that anger is going to dissipate just like the cloud. And it's going to eventually disappear. And then one day, you know what, it'll come back. And guess what? You take your reason, take your logic, take your consciousness, take your mental state, take your mind, look at that anger. And look at it. For the Buddhists, in a meditative state. But you don't have to be in meditation, you could just be quietly thinking. And look at that anger. And when you look at it a second time, you know what? It will eventually dissipate. When you apply reason and logic to it, and according to the Stoics, when you understand that you can't control that, so why am I getting angry? And the Buddhists say, the more times you do that, the lighter the cloud gets. Eventually, that cloud, when it appears, it will appear only momentarily, and then it's gone. They call it mind training. And it sounds a whole lot like the Stoics. Okay? It's a little bit more complete than the Stoics because they're talking about consciousness, and the Stoics talk only about reason and logic. But let's for the time being just say that they're the same. So, you're going to have emotions, yes. But those emotions don't have to be negative, they don't have to be destructive, and they don't have to control you. And when you feel like they're controlling you, take your reason, take your logic, take your mind, and look at it. And it will dissipate. And the more often you do this, just like doing crunches, your muscle will get stronger. Your ability to dissipate those strong emotions will get stronger and stronger just because you're training your mind. Does that make sense, guys? All right, and the hammer, to stabilize your perspective with reason. So you understand here, for the Stoics, it's all about reason. The Stoics base everything that they do in their philosophy on reason. Why? Because if you look at nature, nature is not unreasonable. Nature is not chaotic. Nature is not without order and structure. There are laws to nature. There's a reason. And those laws are the reasons, is the logic to nature. If nature has reason and logic, and the whole universe, then so must we. Especially must we, because we have a rational mind. Okay? So I think I got to the end of it. Yeah, the hammer's the end. All right.